where we can talk about what we've learned. I think the arc of the meeting is that I think we're moving to kind of a discussion recommendation phase on a lot of things, but I think there is an open question about what the mental health and wellness needs are in Westford now and how they've changed over the past year with COVID. So I'm hoping we can hear from folks that have been close to that, maybe with Courtney and with Jeff, sort of what we've seen, and ask ourselves the question, within the scope of this committee, is there additional work that we should be thinking about as we recognize those needs and explore ways that we might be able to serve them as we go forward.
Tom, if I could just jump in for 1 second before the Courtney or Jeff, we were just on the COVID advisory committee meeting, and we had a meeting with our union president last week, Christine Gissom, who was an elementary teacher. The intent of that meeting was that Christine wanted to convey to us the concern over the staff about the rising incidence of mental health issues particularly at the elementary grades right now. And so, there's where we're going to address it with some additional adjustment counselors for next year. But we're also, I was just saying to the other committee, perhaps looking for the need for either more adjustment counselors down the road or social workers for some in-home intervention services. One of the pediatricians did say that she would like to see us, be more of an outreach in nature, and then instead of having the issues come to us, and we'll start talking about that and see if we become certainly more active in terms of identification and servicing the students.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. That's exactly the kind of thing that we'll want to make sure we're thinking about. I think we better get started, just in the interest of everyone's time. I'm going to send Scott just a quick text letting him know that we're kicking off.
I did hear from Anita. She's going to call in shortly. She had another meeting, so she will call in.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, good. Thank you for being here. I know your time is valuable. We have a lot of check-ins to cover, and then I'm hoping to have some good discussion about what we've learned and seen in Westford, in the schools and in the town, and looking forward what work this committee might do to help us better understand and plan for new needs that we're seeing. I'm going to start off with Paul, and Paul has a very brief sort of summary of where we are with some of the physical infrastructure stuff. Paul has been doing a wonderful job with this. And let me just get you to full screen. Paul, if you could take us through in a few minutes, and let me know if you can't see the screen.
No, it's there. Thank you.
Okay, great. Paul, if you can take us through, I just want to make sure people know this work continues and really important stuff. So take it away, Paul.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. And, first, before I even say anything, Mike has just really done an amazing job with all of this. And it's really through all of his efforts and hard doings too, especially with this communications piece here. But I'm happy to highlight all these items. And then if Mike wants to chime in, especially on the phones and PA system, please feel free. But so the first priority that the Town and School Safety Task Force really decided to dive into was to really fix and improve our communications throughout the school system, mainly here. So we really set off with, I've identified what looks to be basically 3 tasks. And the first one would be to improve the phones and the public address system. So our goal here was to have a phone in every single classroom that could serve as the direct line of communication. Before the school system, some of them didn't have phones everywhere. Some of them were sporadic. And then we also had a lot of failing phone lines. And part of this is to create a series of redundancies. That way, if the system failed, it can be carried by another component of the system. That is something that's going to be asked for at town meeting, this coming annual town meeting that I believe Mike Wells is proposing through the Town and School Safety Task Force. So once that's there in place, then our phones will be fully redundant and we'll have a new phone system across the board through the school systems and the town systems. Part of the deliverable on this was to try to tap into the public address system. This is something that we're going to need to talk about and discuss further, both perhaps in this committee, but so too during a school leadership committee. The principals have all voiced their opinion, I know, to Mike, and they've all kind of wanted different access and different administrative levels. However, I believe that uniformity may be the best approach, and in discussions with our first responders, mainly the police and the SROs that we have available to us, we want to make sure that we really are arming and providing the best means of communication possible that we can to them. So what's in place right now is a new phone system in all the buildings. In addition, we have the ability to have any of the phones tap into the building's PA system right now, with the exception of the day school, which is also being proposed at this town meeting. So after this town meeting, there's no reason why no phone or why any single phone can tap into any PA system available to them. That's something that all administrators will have the rights to, again, pending that conversation for how we ultimately want it to work.
Hey, Paul, I'm going to have to be a little bit of a time cop here today, so maybe I'll give you another 2 minutes. Maybe if you can just highlight what things are, and we'll flip to the next slide.
Sounds good. All right, bidirectional amplifier system. This was to improve the communications to the first responders. And right now, we believe that we have the deliverable met from internally. We're just still trying to get that communication to and from the building, but inside seems to have been improved. Just a little hiccup there. For the two-way radios, we're working on the final procurement of that. Ultimately, this will be 250 radios that will be procured and in place before before September 1st. So all teachers.
This conference will now be recorded.
All teachers in school buildings, all the teachers and administrative faculty staff, depending upon how they wanted their building set up, will have a new two-way radio system in place. For access controls, this is an item that we just finalized our bid on. We have done a lot of work with Westford Academy, and now we're ready to do all the other work to the remainder of the schools. This will include about 65 card readers being added to all of them, and we'll have an ID badge system in place here as well. We do have to talk about the administrative components of that, as that will be a difficult piece to manage. And another item here, which I want to be very clear about, is that the visitor management system, this is an item that will be installed at every single front building, will be a way of producing a badge to wear and verifying that this is a safe person to have come through our buildings. We were only going to do this if room allowed in the budget. Fortunately, for our town meeting request, we had a bid come in that was about $100,000 lower. So I believe that we have the room inside of our budget to expand upon what we wanted to do for exterior access controls, and this being a major component of that. So as long as there's no objections here, we will certainly look to implement that piece, which was always a priority that we had for access controls. And finally, for future discussions, we still need to talk about and establish a bunch of policies and procedures that we have. Now that we have all this equipment and materials in place, we need to make sure that we're have an understanding for how it's going to operate and how do we maintain the integrities of all the systems. We'll have to have a conversation about future projects. The next step for the projects that we wanted to go after was interior access controls and how we can better secure our buildings. We discussed at one point installing a device on every single door, versus we could look at other options to potentially reconfigure some of the zoning of the building a little bit to create more sections, if you will, that can be locked and cordoned off. And then finally, for our last project that we have from what was our 5-year capital plan, was to improve all the video surveillance around the buildings. So I guess all in all, in total, we've definitely taken a huge step with the communication piece of it. Access controls will all be implemented by the end of September, right before school gets back in place. And then we'll just have to work on hardening up interior. How do we control that flow?
So hats off to Paul and Mike and everyone who's worked on this. A good way to think about it, at least the way I think about it, is that come December 1st, a lot of the objectives that we've had will be accomplished. Anybody who's not on mute, they want to be on mute. A little bit of feedback. I don't know if I can actually mute somebody from here. Maybe I can. Okay, I think I did it. Any questions? Hi, Jody.
I just wanted to make sure that we're clear that what Paul was asking is that we have a surplus and they would like to spend about $90,000 to do those temporary badges for people that get in. As long as no one objects to that, then he's going to move forward and bid that. But we wanted to be, that was beyond what we had talked about. We wanted to be sure everyone's comfortable with that use.
Christina.
I just had one question about that. So will that cover all of the school buildings, that $90,000?
Yes, so we've gotten soft estimates on it. We still need to choose the appropriate system, but we've looked at something called Lobby Guard, and there's another one that Detective Paval, or excuse me, I think it's now Lieutenant Paval, is very familiar with. So it will be one stationed at every single main entrance, and we'll be able to include a database into it that identifies people as they like blacklist people, or as you know, no, they should not enter your building. And then they get a badge, and after a while, the badge will have a strike through on it, meaning that they're no longer supposed to be in the building anymore.
Okay, thanks.
Obviously, Paul will be working closely with the school team to figure out the best way to do this and make sure all their concerns are addressed, as he has throughout. The piece that will remain for us to think about, and I think the thought for the committee right now is that we would implement this and then pause and evaluate. But I think further development of vestibule structures, so you'd have a two-door system, is something that could be part of the future. And then, as Paul mentioned, there could be strategies to help manage access within a building by making wings of a building, for example, be card access, so not every classroom necessarily, but to help further manage access. Or it could be we could consider every door. But I think we would push that off as a decision until we'd sort of let this current set of investments and training settle, make sure everyone's comfortable with the tools that we have and feel like we've, they feel they can sort of gauge where we are and see if we need to do more. Any other questions about that piece? Okay, the next piece of activity since we were last together was around school resource officer. There's a number of materials in your that were sent out to help talk about this. Sort of by way of summary, we took a little bit of a step back and we said it's interesting what guideposts our consultants recommended, but we really need to think about what's right for Westford. And so a couple things. One is we wanted to see, and we also sort of as a philosophy, there's a number of different ways you could think about this. The whole idea of making use of school resource officers was coming from a place of, identification and potential, mitigation of people who are, at risk, sort of emergency response training. So really helping to prepare the buildings where appropriate, working with students, providing services to buildings with things like, online activities or other things that the school resource officers are particularly well equipped for. The other idea could be some sort of threat response idea. That was not the idea. The idea was really training, coaching, being available as a resource. Courtney did a super job talking to a lot of folks at the building level about are there needs that you've seen school resource officers provide before or are aware that they're providing that they do particularly well, they sort of uniquely well, high impacted students can really have a great outcome. A number of those things were identified. And so the working group, I don't think we reached a consensus. We didn't take a vote, but the place that we landed was that if we looked at really two things, one is the unmet needs that were perceived to be high value in terms of training, in terms of identification of risk and appropriate interventions, in terms of providing other value-added services where the SROs are especially well suited to doing that work. If you look at that set of needs and you look at the fact that the existing SRO is fairly fully tasked with functions and roles that are perceived to be high value by the people who are in Westford Academy. If you look at the sort of need that people discussed that's not currently being met, and the fact that we have one SRO that's really fully tasked, we're exploring the idea of a second SRO as a sort of a discussion item to bring to the community. Again, we do with communities go through some of the needs that have been identified at the building level, talk about what those are, help people understand the current tasking and loading on the SRO that we have, and then get some feedback. And we wanted to make sure we brought that to the DEI committee and some of the students who have a DEI background who've been really important to this discussion so far, make sure we had their input. But that's sort of where the SRO discussion has evolved to. And so I think what our next plan would be to say, let's explore the idea as a community around one and talk about pluses and minuses. So let me pause there and see. A number of people on this call were part of the discussion earlier, but either something important that I've missed or questions about sort of the approach and how we might further engage with folks. Mark, what is your full title? I saw someone on an email call you, was it like acting provisional?
Yeah, it's technically it's interim police chief, but it's acting interim provisional.
Okay.
I'm holding down the hat right now. So I did just want to bring up the fact, Chris actually brought up a really interesting point when we were in the subcommittee about breaking down the SRO's daily responsibilities, weekly responsibilities into his duties. And I know, Tom, you incorporated that into the slideshow that was provided. So but that was new information that I'm not sure if it was provided to the whole group prior to this meeting being scheduled. So there is some new information in that slide presentation that you sent along, and hopefully that helped to answer some of Chris's questions that we had in the subcommittee meeting.
Yep, if I didn't, I can forward that to everybody. It probably was Lieutenant Pavao and might have been Tony, and probably with help from you, acting chief, but both sort of a tabular list of what was going on and then sort of a percentage of breakdown of time. So interesting learning, and interesting to try to get a perspective of, is the resource we've already dedicated there fully allocated or not? And I mean, I think it is the.
And if I can clarify, it's actually Sergeant Pavao. I'll let Jeff know that you promoted him, Paul, and it caught on real quick. So I'll be happy about that.
That's how promotion works in Westford, right? Just show up at a meeting, someone gets it wrong, and it happens.
Tom, I just want to say it wasn't sent to the prior group, so I did get it forwarded to me today. But just so if there's anybody else, I don't know if there are other people that may not have gotten it. So I wasn't on the list before, and I just wanted to say thanks to the interim chief and everyone who helped put that together. That was really helpful.
Okay, I will. I'll make sure to forward that to the group because there was a lot of good hard work there done. We'll talk more in a second about how we might bring this forward to the community and who we want to make sure we engage with. Before we do that, a couple things to touch on because it's relevant to our discussion next. One of the recommendation sets that you're all well aware of is the emotional wellness resources in the schools. Everyone knows this already probably, but in case you haven't seen it, in this year's school budget, there was a substantial request that's currently moving forward in the budget that'll be voted on in town meeting to provide those additional resources. I think everyone involved in the committee and who saw the backgrounds just thrilled that that's a decision that was made by the school committee and school leadership, and that we were able to make it budgetarily. So I think that's great. I think we'll have an opportunity before we make any more concrete recommendations. We'll talk about what's next, but it'll probably be a couple phases. I hope what we'll have a chance to do is see those resources get to work, get a first look at the effectiveness they're having, and then come back and say, okay, originally this group had recommended a full-time resource at each of those locations. Do we think that the need is still there? Was it well addressed by the resources that we already put in place? But it's great that we're making a start. And on the topic of making a start, maybe Jeff, you can let the group know about some of the good work that you've done in helping us get started on some of the community wellness program. Jeff, I can't hear you. I don't know if other people can.
Unmute, Jeff, I think.
I could hear Jeff talking before because we were talking about his beautiful tie. So I'm not quite sure what happened.
I wonder if he signs off, Tom, and then signs back in, if that might work. But sometimes
Should we give that a try, Jeff? Okay, we'll save Jeff's news for Jeff to share when we get him back. One thing I can mention is, so we are thinking that we're going to do check-ins on these programs as a committee. One idea that Andrea brought up, Gloria, which I don't think I've had a chance to chat with you about, but Gloria's idea was when we do a check-in with the select board and the school committee, since those are the jointly appointing boards, maybe we could do that update all together and sort of talk about this topic at a time that makes sense. But seemed like both an efficient way to do it, and also one of the topics we'll talk about today is, do we think the charter stands as it is? Do we think it needs to be refined or changed? That would be a topic for that group. So that might come up.
Tom?
Yep.
May I ask a question? And this is going to involve Courtney and Lori and Kelly. Is there any reason from your perspective to think that from the school perspective, we need to give more definition to the nature of the issue to determine what types of staff we need? I mean, I know there aren't a lot of different types of staff, but would that be of any necessary input at this point in time, or down the road before we do any more staffing? Or do we sufficiently understand the nature of the issues with children?
I think that's a great question, Bill. And I think that there's always a good opportunity to kind of step back and to see where we are. Clearly, adding the 0.5 school adjustment counselor to each elementary school is going to be a great addition for us next year. But we're also adding a 0.4 school psychologist. And the reason for that is because our testing level is so high. In other districts, some school psychologists do a combination of treatment and testing. And we do only testing because of our high volume. So as we move forward in understanding what our social emotional needs are, or fleshing them out even more, I think we have a pretty good understanding right now. I think that is a good thought to include all of that counseling group to say, what is it that we need? Is it school psychologists that do more than just the testing? Is it school adjustment counselors, guidance counselors, BCBAs? So on the other spectrum, when we have significant behaviors, a BCBA can be very helpful. And right now we do employ 2 full-time BCBAs, but they are quite extended in what they do. So I do think that would be a good suggestion.
Okay.
Jeff, let's do a mic check.
How about now?
All right, you're good.
All right. Not sure what happened there, but it just showed me as active and wasn't communicating. So my department, along with the town of Dracut, City of Lowell, and the town of Acton, have worked on a grant. And that grant is for a few things. It's for a shared services. It's a shared service grant with funding provided through the Department of Public Health. And we were awarded almost $300,000 last week. And that grant is going to do 3 things. It's going to provide an accreditation manager for all 4 departments so we can build programming towards accreditation federally. Additionally, we are hiring a grants management manager that is going to look for sustainable funding in the future. And the third and most important part to this group is we are going to be able to hire a community health and wellness coordinator, which will be a full-time position. It will be shared between 4 towns, but they will be housed in Westford, which will give us hair more access. So we were finally able to get some funding and start building a program for those 4 towns. So we're pretty excited about it.
Really exciting that's come through, and that gives us an opportunity to get started so much sooner than we might have otherwise, and looking at what kind of services we might be able to provide. Before we move into kind of a broader discussion of what we've seen since we were last together over the past year in terms of needs in the town that we should be thinking about, any questions about anything we've talked about so far? The sort of core of sort of our mandate is the physical security piece. At this point, the recommendation sets we have, which were the Adjustment Council resources in the schools, this wellness coordinator that we'll talk much more about, I think. And then the SRO recommendation to bring to discussion. Okay. I'm sorry, Christina?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I have 2 questions. One, Jeff, that community health and wellness coordinator position, is that fully funded through the grant, or are there matching funds that the towns have to put up?
Fully funded with benefits.
Awesome. Okay, great.
And it also gets 15% administrative cost of the grant.
Okay. And how long will that grant last?
This grant is renewable for 3 years pending state funding.
Okay. And then, Courtney, you had talked about kind of giving a picture of student needs at some point. I just wanted to say that I think that would be really helpful.
Okay.
That's it.
Yep, Emily?
Yeah, I just wanted to check in regarding the cultural competence piece of our goals. We've sort of mentioned it by email a little bit, that we would kind of run things by the DEI committee. I just wanted to emphasize that in the meeting and make sure that that's, part of our plan going forward.
Yes, and so we can just touch on the groups that I think we'd like to go and make sure we would like to outreach to everybody, but specifically we want to make sure we're engaging with the DEI committee. And after this meeting, if that's the direction we feel like we want to take, then Scott and I will be reaching out, maybe through Omar or Anita, to try to figure out the best time to do that, and also the right scope of presentation. I know they have a busy agenda, so we could fill up any volume in terms of time. So we want to make sure we get the right input that we need in the right way. I do want to make sure we reach out to the students that have been so active and reach out to them, whether that's the Westford Coalition for Change or whether that's an expanded group. And we'll do a public session too. But thanks for bringing that up, Emily. I think in particular, as we spend maybe the next 20 minutes or so talking about what the requirements are in Westford right now in the current climate that we face, we're going to really need to get input from everybody. Because as we've learned, different communities experience mental health issues differently. Any other question? Hi, Anita.
Hi, sorry, I joined a little bit late, but I have a question for Jeff, and I think this new grant is awesome. I'm so excited for you. Thank you and Jody for putting the grant application together, whoever did it, that's awesome. I was wondering if you could share, I don't know if it's the grant application that you could share with me or anyone else who's interested, but I'm really interested in knowing kind of like what the needs assessment needs are, I guess, for across all 4 communities, so that we can kind of compare. Like, I understand we would have an advantage if this position is in Westford, but like how much of that time is really in competition with the other towns' needs as well? Because it sounds like we have a pretty big need here, and I imagine Lowell would have a really big one too, right? Just of the other towns that you've mentioned.
So there was no true needs assessment done for the grant. There was no requirement for one. So what this grant was doing is it was a fairly simple application to fill out. And public health is looking to share services throughout regions and create new partnerships that may or may not have existed. So Dracut, Lowell, and Westford have worked together on emergency preparedness issues in the past, but Acton was a new partnership, and they have some similar issues as Westford. For example, we were looking at our interface numbers when I was doing this application, and for those of you that don't know, interface is a referral service, and in the past 4.5 months, there were 60 referrals out of interface, which means that hotline was getting an awful lot of action. We know that mental health and we know that depression and anxiety are extraordinarily big issues right now, and that's based off of the calls coming in. We're seeing it through our contact tracing and how people are reacting. So we know mental health and wellness and substance abuse are clearly an issue, and we don't have a lot of measurables on that because there really aren't any. And part of this position is going to help develop what the absolute true needs are and develop programming to help address that.
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay. That's related to the grant writer position through this grant, which I think is an awesome addition as well. And is that really specific to kind of, I mean, I guess I would be interested in knowing sort of the scope of that position as well, if that's something you could share with us at a later time, if not now.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a grant management manager that's going to look for additional funding. We're going to be developing that job description very soon. We're waiting for more information out of the state on what they need, which we're expecting next week. The plan is to be able to fund these positions well into the future after the money runs out. And we know year one's going to be critical because we truly don't know if, even though we're told there'll be funding in year two, you never really know that.
Valerie?
I just had a quick follow-up question, and I may have missed this because I was doing a bus stop juggle. Is the position that Jeff just referred to, is that the same as the job description that was attached in the email, or is that different? The social emotional wellness coordinator job description?
So they're technically not the same position, but some of those pieces of that I will probably use in the job description that will be working in all.
So was the attachment written as like what we kind of would have hoped, and then this grant is kind of fell into our laps as maybe a way to help some of it? Is that, am I?
So a good way to think about it, Valerie, is we sort of had a working idea of what we thought we were going to make a request for as this committee, or make a recommendation. We hadn't voted on it, but we were exploring the idea of this position. But because Jeff and his team and Jody jumped on this opportunity, we get this excellent opportunity to start earlier with a portion of that position. And I think there could be a lot of overlap in terms of what the responsibilities might be between the job description for the two. But because we're sharing the resource across a bunch of communities, it gives us a lot. It gives us something we didn't have before and something we can get started with, which is great. But I think it does change maybe what other recommendations this committee might make. And so for this discussion that we're about to have, the reason I want to hear from folks that have got their ears to the ground on what needs they're observing is just one idea for us to come back to is we've had sort of working teams before form for various purposes that kind of form and then come up with an idea and then bring it back to the committee. One idea here would be really to dig deep in this very important need set around what are other communities doing, what do we need to be looking at, what are the needs as they're changing in Westford, are there opportunities to expand the service we provide to everybody who lives here, the seniors, the parents, the families, the children, and that can kind of work alongside, I think, what Jeff is going to be kind of gearing up with this grant fund effort. Well, why don't we start? I mean, if you have questions, please raise your hand. But for folks that have, been working closely with students, or Jeff will certainly want to tap into some more of what you've observed. Where do we think the climate is right now in terms of substance abuse, domestic abuse, mental wellness, all of these needs that we've been thinking about before? kind of where are we today? What's changed, if anything? Maybe Courtney, can I ask you? Thanks, Courtney.
So Tom, I brought a couple numbers today that I had shared with you just last week around hospitalizations. The question came up during one of our last meetings that we had with a smaller group in regards to are we aware of all of those students who end up hospitalized? Are they currently receiving some sort of support from the school? And right now we are at a total of 32 hospitalizations for this school year. That number is slightly lower than what we've had in the past, but we have seen an uptick since we've had the full return back to school. Now, why is that happening? I think there could be a couple different reasons in terms of are students more stressed now that they're coming back to school? Are some of our students who have been school avoidant, now creeping up a little bit more? Or are the hospitals or the doctors feeling more free to make referrals and actually, or do parents feel more comfortable bringing their student for care? So I think all of those variables definitely play into the numbers that we're looking at. Of those 32 hospitalizations, it represents 25 students. So those 25 students, the differential is because some of those kiddos have unfortunately had multiple hospitalizations. And when we talk about hospitalizations, I'm referring to both students who have been referred to inpatient care as well as partial programs. So partial programs might look like that the student is actually residing in the home, and then during the school day, during the hours of the daylight hours, they are attending a partial program for services, and it's pretty intensive. So during that time, it's challenging for them to also handle their academic caseload, and we would provide tutoring. All of these students were on our radar screen. They were all being seen by somebody in our school that was in charge of counseling. So unfortunately, it wasn't a big surprise when we see the names come across our desks, but those are the numbers as they stand right now.
Thanks, Courtney. Jeff, do you have any read that you could share on sort of what we're seeing in the community in terms of additional stress or other things we're seeing?
So what we're seeing and hearing in our end is generally around COVID stress and anxiety. And that's where we're getting the calls in on people that are nervous, people that are scared, a lot of anxiety, people that are looking for help with depression. And that's just something that we're unfortunately not quite equipped to handle in the health department. So we've got to get them numbers and get them referred out to somebody else, which is why we're hoping this new position will help with some of that.
Acting Chief, Mark, have you seen anything from kind of a public safety side that would be important for this group to know?
Other than we're exploring additional grant opportunities to address the cases that we're coming across. I think that Jeff has most everything covered. We haven't seen any uptick in anything right now. So
I don't know if we've seen any substance abuse, stress or events related to substance abuse that have, we've had a few community members that we've lost related to substance abuse during the past year. I don't know if we have any additional facts or anything that would say that trend is going up or is about the same. That would be a question for you.
As part of our annual statistics, we do look at that, and we have held fairly consistent even through the pandemic. We really haven't seen all that much of an uptick that we haven't over the past 3-year trend or so.
Okay, good. That's helpful to know. Bill was mentioning earlier that that they were getting more concerns from staff about sort of heightened levels of stress and anxiety and potential need for extra emotional mental health support. Jody, are you seeing anything from the town side in terms of how the staff is doing that would make us change sort of how we look at this or add more to the picture?
You know, the only change I've really seen is that I've had more people retire or leave than ever before. So I don't know if they're reevaluating their lives or what's exactly going on, but I have many more people that have given notice than ever before. So I think the staff is coping, and I think they feel the town has done a good job protecting them. I think it was a little rougher last spring when there were so many unknowns, but that's really all I'm seeing. And from the community reaching out to me, I would say it's pretty consistent with what it usually is. I have not seen more people anxious about things.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. I think one question that is worthy of reevaluation and maybe a question for this group is, I think what we may want to consider for recommendations may shift a little bit now that we have the opportunity to have this program get started. It makes me think a little bit more about, we'll have a portion of this person maybe acting as sort of an architect to what some of the resources might be. What does that mean in terms of, substance abuse support specifically, which I know we've been thinking about sort of as a group pending recommendation. I'm also interested to know just what other communities have done that may have been of particular impact during this time or just in general. So I think the question is, do we think that it might be valuable to have a working group sort of help refine or think a little bit more about what recommendations this group might want to make, sort of group that might go off and, look at some other communities, study some things a little bit more closely, maybe get closer to the data of what we are seeing in town, consider sort of what substance abuse programming might look like to help us refine a little bit what we might want to come back with. Emily, I see your hand.
Yes, this is kind of a half-formed thought. It just came up while Jeff was talking about, sorry, I've got a guest star here, about that we don't have the resources to deal with, thanks for the backup, to deal with, people asking for depression issues and that sort of thing. And we make referrals. And I'm just wondering what would be different about what a wellness coordinator would do. I mean, if they don't have, they still wouldn't have those resources, right? They'd still be making referrals. And so I'm just, going into that question, what are other towns doing? I'm just curious, how helpful is a coordinator when you still don't have the resources? That's just a thought.
Jody?
It's pretty easy for me to reach out to other towns. I mean, with a few clicks of buttons, I can reach out to town managers and see if anyone has done something, which probably saves a group trying to figure that out. I really don't know if they've done things. I think we have a pretty robust health department compared to most towns, but I'm happy to find out if there's something going on that we're not aware of.
Courtney?
I was just saying, one example might be, some of the volunteers that helped out with coordinating the COVID shots. I know it's something completely different, but for somebody who's really busy and has a lot on their plate, having a coordinator who knows which provider is accepting new patients, who's not accepting new patients, who does adolescents, who does substance abuse, who takes what insurance, especially Mass Health, or how to navigate that process. Those pieces might be helpful, because for somebody who's in a twist and really trying to get support for themselves or for their child or for their senior parent, they might feel that stress of making 2 phone calls and not getting anywhere. But to have somebody keep you going, I think that could be incredibly helpful to get you to that end line. I don't think the solution that's ever going to be that is the town of Westford or Westford Public Schools going to have this breadth of, mental health providers that would be available, because that's not what we do. I think we still have to walk that fine line between what are school-based services and what is the responsibility of a healthcare provider or insurance. So that's always a tricky little line that we follow.
I think that's actually really good point. That legwork is really important. I've seen it. MIT's HR department has a service like that where they do all the phone calls and they track down, the provider that has what you need. And I think that's incredibly valuable.
So that's a critical part. Another part that the wellness coordinator was envisioned was sort of building linkages between students who've had good attention through the schools, who may be at some risk once they graduate. Is there some way that we can make sure that, that we're sort of continuing to help them if they need help and they're exiting the services provided through the school? Making sure that, grant writing was always a thought that might be an important part of it. We'll see how this approach sort of takes action on it, but providing linkages between the groups, between things like the support groups that we've had for domestic violence, and making sure that there's good awareness and education about what resources there are, where people can find them, connect with them. Anybody who's ever sort of entered into any kind of support through for mental health or substance abuse, it's like a bewildering process because it's very hard to find anybody who's taking new patients. It's not all covered by insurance in the same way. So anything that can be done, or one idea to explore here, I guess, with this position is if they can help ease that process or help consolidate resources or give people, a couple extra steps, that could be pretty valuable. I guess one question is, so thank you, Jody. We'll definitely take you up on your offer to see what other towns are doing and what programming they've seen be successful. I, at least in the face of this new great opportunity, am not totally sure now that we're going to have this resource, what we would ask for next, or recommend for consideration, in particular around substance abuse, but it could be many other topics as well. Maybe I'll just ask if there are people who would be interested in sort of maybe taking some of the information that Jody has, working with Jeff and seeing how that program evolves. I think getting some more developed thoughts about what we think, the needs are and what resources might best address the community, over the next, say, 3 months might be pretty helpful. And to bring that forward to the school committee and the select board, I think might be pretty helpful as planning begins, in the fall for the following year. So if there are folks here that would be interested in, I'll definitely be tapping into folks that have that expertise. But if there are other people who are interested in that, please let me know, because I do think a working group there would be valuable to help refine now that we have this new resource set, thinking a little bit more about what we might want to bring forward in recommendations. I don't think in this round of conversations we're about to have, we'll be ready to make that recommendation. I think we'll talk about the fact that because of this successful grant that Jeff and his team have brought to us, we're going to be sort of listening and learning now that comes up to speed over the next 6 months, but that there likely will be things not covered by the grant that could provide substantial assistance that we'll at least be considering for a potential recommendation. Anita?
I'm not officially on the task force, but I'd be happy to help out with that. Obviously, this is an interest area of mine, and I think a lot about older adults as well, right? All of the social isolation issues because of COVID. So if if I can be helpful, I'm happy to be.
Yeah, well, of course, we'll take you up on that. I think this is sort of the next, the feedback I've also gotten from Andrea is maybe this is the piece that, we've done a lot of work. I think the facilities were really ready to implement and then see and monitor. Got a great start with the emotional support resources, emotional wellness support resources going into the schools. I think this is the piece that's sort of not as well defined. How do we address the whole community at large? Are there needs that are emerging that we want to get resources behind? What's effective or not effective? So
Yeah,
I think
and how
that'll
can it
be
complement the school side, right, versus duplicating efforts?
right. So I think we will do that. Courtney.
I'd like to lead, just the school-based assessment, and kind of to Christina's point and Bill's earlier point about, do we need more staff? It would be nice to kind of research the other districts and how do they configure their mental health and wellness. Are they heavier on school psychologists? What type of personnel or clinician or licensure are they looking for? Also, our goal is to always keep students in school, to keep them in the classroom and in front of in their instruction. So what are the types do we have enough services that are helping them to feel comfortable, or are we really stressing them by forcing them into the mainstream and to go through a middle school and a high school? So is there a way, we have found tremendous success in one of the new classrooms that we started 2 years ago at Westford Academy that we just called 125 or SEL. And that is, led by one special education teacher and one school adjustment counselor. So we've been able to kind of create a school within a school for those students, and we've had tremendous success. So I think taking a look at what those programs look like, as well as what other districts are offering, could be helpful.
Great, thank you. Anita?
I would also be curious to know about those students who might not be enrolled specifically in the Westford Public Schools, right? So if it's Neshoba Tech, or if it's kids who are homeschooled, which I know is a smaller population, kind of where they would fit into this bigger picture too. If that's something, Courtney, that you would be looking at, or if that's something that another group of people will be looking at. I'm not really sure where this population falls, but I just want to make sure those groups aren't lost too.
Right. And with Neshoba Tech, they have that responsibility within their own school, to provide the social emotional support. Homeschooling brings up a good point, especially this year where we've seen such a large number of students who have been homeschooled. And that too is a delicate balancing act, because some homeschooled families are not interested in participating, but we can certainly draw them in, I'm sure.
Christina?
Thanks. So I guess I'm trying to take a step back with the whole social emotional wellness piece of this, both town and school, and still trying to get my head around, what problems are we trying to solve, and what data and metrics, if there are some, that we can sort of watch and point to maybe in the next 6 months to say, oh, this went down or this went up, obviously in a positive direction. And I think if we can kind of gather some points, then we can sort of watch those and sort of see how our programs are doing. I mean, I think when we started this whole thing a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we were already sort of thinking more adjustment counselors in the schools and a coordinator position for the town. And so we're going to have that. Maybe we sit back for X amount of time and see how they do. But again, I think we need to benchmark against something. And I don't know what those some things are besides the number of hospitalizations that Courtney mentioned, which is, that's sort of at one extreme. But it would be nice to get sort of a run the gamut of what are the issues that we're trying to solve with some kind of numbers.
The school adjustment counselor has been something that the elementary principals have voiced for years. Mm-hmm. It just has never made it to the whole budget process.
Right.
So we're so thankful that we're at least going to get a 0.5 of it. One of the biggest pieces are that our guidance counselors who are full-time have responsibilities within the school. They're teaching classes, they're doing pull-out, any student who might already be identified on a 504 or an IEP, so we know that they need a small, either individual or social skills group. The need for additional support is that you can't schedule a crisis. And so sometimes somebody who's walking through the door, not ready to learn for whatever reason, needs immediate attention. And that is taking away from what we were trying to accomplish with that full-time guidance counselor. So we can certainly take some numbers in terms of who do we know that requires small group support, individual support, and then, take a snapshot in time. Maybe ask for a couple dipsticking a couple times during the year in terms of what does our crisis look like? who's walking through the door, who's exploding at 9:35, who's hitting a wall right after lunch, and really taking up all of the time. And when we say taking up all the time, it immediately includes the principal, the assistant principal. And with the additional 0.5 elementary principal this year, we're going to have 2 full-time administrators in each elementary school, in addition to that 0.5 school adjustment counselor. So our model is going to look so much different, and the capabilities of those adults to service the kiddos and to help alleviate some of the stress that's in those classrooms and to keep the learning going. We are certainly anticipating to see an increase in that.
And Christina, we did ask for some other, with Jeff and Mark's help in the past, we have pulled together some, and also Joe Targ's help, pulled together some, emergency response for substance abuse. People can open a couple of different systems though, and so we've never had a super way to pull that together, but we do need to track that. So I think part of what we would ask this group to do is, as best as we can, how are we looking at these various metrics of, people in distress that we want to be, paying attention to.
Right. And I guess I'm sort of thinking down the line of if we show up next town meeting and are asking for more money for something, we can point back and say, we authorized this at town meeting a year ago. This is what we got. And look, these are the metrics that improved. If you can wrap it up in a nice little neat bow like that. I know that doesn't exactly fit, but as much as we can to try to also gauge how well we're doing with the money that we're spending.
Right. I saw Anita, and I may have seen, if I saw anyone else, Anita.
Yeah, I was wondering if, Jeff, there was any information in the grant application that might be able to speak to Christina's questions around benchmarks that maybe we could take a look at later. I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you any questions right now. Data off the top of your head. But maybe Allison Christopher, I don't want to volunteer people who aren't here, but I know I've had a call with her about, the town wellness coordinator position and the needs that she sees. And if we might be able to tap into her a little bit to kind of create some of that, a better sense of, or get a better sense of the landscape around needs too.
Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. As we were having this conversation, I started to kind of catalog all the things that the police department has access to. Because the one thing that kind of resonated with me, I'm not sure if it was Emily or Christina or who had mentioned it, but the one thing that we see that is lacking, that this conversation kind of brought to the forefront for me, is the lack of coordination. So we refer people to services, and it's the referrals, but we lack that central coordinator that can do all the follow-ups. And within the police department, we're only seeing a small portion of what's happening. So, and that is very difficult for us to follow up on and help coordinate those services once we make the referral, and kind of knock down those additional barriers that some people may experience. So when that was mentioned about the 2 phone calls and then hitting the wall, I think that would be a very valuable resource, just based upon the services that we already kind of coordinate with. I think that is a gap.
Okay. Well, we are at 4:00. I think the roadmap from here, a couple of things. One is, I think the next time this full group will meet, we're trying to be very careful with your time, because I know this is, like the brain trust of the town. So it's great that we can get you here for an hour when we can. I think what will happen, we'll do the communication discussions that we talked about around sort of the existing set that we've gone through, which would be the town DEI committee, some of the students who've raised their hand and shown interest in this. We'll do at least one full public meeting. And then we'll probably meet, if it makes sense to Gloria as well, we'll probably meet in a joint session at some point with select board and school committee to sort of say, here's where we are. Do we think that charter still makes sense for this group? Here's what we're thinking about next steps in terms of, tracking and being in a better position to make recommendations for mental health and wellness resources alongside this excellent grant that we're moving into. So this group would probably get back together if this small group begins to look at sort of this mental health piece more closely. Well, we would probably get back together after we have this series of meetings culminating with the select board, school committee, because this group would want to take a vote on recommendations with all that input on board. So we'd want to say, okay, here's what we've heard. This committee on the things that we already have teed up for a vote. So, additional mental health resources at schools, et cetera. If we feel like we're ready to take that vote, we would. The other time we would get back together is if this working group around mental health support resources has findings, can maybe say, this is how the grants evolved. This is what we've seen in the early months of this new program. This is what we think, and we now want to at least bring forward for discussion for recommendations about what the town may want to consider. So let me thank you all for your patience and persistence, and I will send follow up on some of the stuff that didn't go out before, the information on the SRO that was compiled. I'll put a little note in there that says if you are interested in this, sort of digging into this next phase around potential mental health resource ads that we've been discussing, you can respond to that and say yes, and we'll try to set up that next meeting. And we'll also let you know once we've scheduled any of these public sessions. It's not a requirement that you be there, but if you are able to join, it's great to have you there. You may be able to answer some questions or field some perspectives based on work that you've done with this committee with people who are there. So we'll make sure you're aware of that. Again, not a requirement, but if you are available, you'd be very welcome. Any other questions for now before we adjourn? Okay, well, great. If that's it, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. And as mentioned, we'll follow up with all that information and look forward to getting together in a couple months when we're ready. Thanks.